Off duty. No vest. No weapon. She was just visiting a forward base when a supply tent caught fire. Screams echoed. Explosions followed. And while everyone scrambled for cover, she sprinted in, bare hands, face wrapped in cloth, and dragged a trapped technician from the blaze. Burns on her arms. Ash in her lungs. But she didn't stop until he was safe. The medics later asked, "Were you military?" She smiled. "You don't need to be on duty to do the right thing." The civilian they overlooked? She did what most trained soldiers wouldn't. From which part of the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories of courage that transcends duty and proves heroism comes from the heart, not the uniform, consider subscribing for more content that celebrates extraordinary acts of human bravery. The harsh afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on forward operating base Black Hawk in the Helmand province of Afghanistan, casting long shadows across the dusty compound where American forces maintained a critical logistics hub for coalition operations throughout the region. At 1,347 hours on September 15th, Staff Sergeant Rebecca Martinez walked through the main gate carrying nothing more than a small overnight bag and wearing civilian clothes that marked her as distinctly out of place among the heavily armed soldiers who populated the base. Rebecca was technically off duty, taking advantage of a 72-hour pass to visit her younger brother, Corporal Diego Martinez, who served as a communications specialist with the base's signal detachment. The siblings had grown up in El Paso, Texas, where their father had worked as a firefighter and their mother as a trauma nurse, instilling in both children a deep sense of service and commitment to helping others. Rebecca had followed a different path than her brother, choosing civilian employment as an emergency medical technician rather than military service, but her work with emergency response teams had given her extensive experience with crisis situations and trauma care. The forward operating base buzzed with the controlled chaos of military logistics operations as convoys prepared for missions throughout the province and supply shipments arrived from Bagram Airfield and other major installations. Rebecca observed the organized activity with professional interest, noting how military emergency response procedures compared to the civilian protocols she used in her work with the El Paso Fire Department's Emergency Medical Services Division. Corporal Martinez spotted his sister approaching the communications tent and broke into a broad grin that transformed his normally serious expression. "Becca, I can't believe you actually made it out here. When you said you were coming to visit, I thought you were joking." His enthusiasm was infectious, drawing smiles from nearby soldiers who recognized the rare joy of unexpected family visits in a combat zone. Rebecca embraced her brother warmly, noting how much he had changed during his deployment. Diego had always been the serious, studious sibling, but months of combat operations had added a maturity and confidence that reminded her of their father during his most challenging years as a first responder. "I told you I'd find a way to get here," she replied. The Red Cross arranged transport through their family visit program. "I've got 3 days before I have to head back." The reunion took place in the communications tent, where Diego introduced Rebecca to his colleagues and explained the sophisticated equipment systems that kept the base connected to higher headquarters and supported units throughout the region. Rebecca listened with professional interest, asking technical questions that demonstrated her understanding of emergency communications and coordination procedures. Sergeant First Class Michael Torres, the senior communications NCO, was impressed by Rebecca's knowledge and professional background. "Your sister knows her stuff, Martinez. EMT training must cover a lot of the same emergency response procedures we use here." His comment sparked a conversation about similarities between military and civilian emergency response, with Rebecca sharing experiences from her work with the fire department that paralleled the soldiers' experiences in combat operations. The informal discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Jennifer Walsh, the base operations officer, who was conducting routine coordination meetings with various support elements. Walsh paused when she noticed Rebecca, recognizing immediately that civilian personnel required special consideration for security and safety protocols. "Ma'am, I'm Rebecca Martinez, visiting my brother through the Red Cross family program." Rebecca introduced herself with the same professional courtesy she used when working with police officers and other emergency responders in civilian settings. "I have proper authorization and understand the security requirements for my visit." Captain Walsh reviewed Rebecca's paperwork and confirmed her authorization for the base visit, then provided a brief security orientation that covered emergency procedures, restricted areas, and safety protocols for civilian personnel. The briefing was standard procedure, but Walsh's professional manner put Rebecca at ease and demonstrated the military's commitment to ensuring visitor safety. As the afternoon progressed, Diego took Rebecca on an informal tour of the base, showing her the dining facility, recreation areas, and other locations where she was authorized to visit during her stay. The tour provided opportunities for Rebecca to meet other soldiers and learn about their experiences, creating connections that went beyond her immediate family relationship. Specialist Sarah Kim, a medic with the base's medical detachment, struck up a conversation with Rebecca about emergency medical procedures and trauma care in combat environments. "It's interesting to meet a civilian EMT," Kim observed. "A lot of what we do here is similar to what you probably handle on the civilian side, but the environment creates some unique challenges." Rebecca shared experiences from her civilian work that paralleled military medical situations, including mass casualty events, trauma care in challenging environments, and coordination with multiple agencies during complex emergency responses. The conversation highlighted similarities between military and civilian emergency medical care, while acknowledging the unique challenges of providing medical support in combat zones. The informal medical discussion was joined by other personnel, including Sergeant David Rodriguez from the base's security detachment and Corporal Lisa Thompson from the logistics section. The group's conversation ranged across various aspects of emergency response, highlighting how different military specialties contributed to overall base security and operational effectiveness. As evening approached, Diego suggested that Rebecca join him and his colleagues for dinner at the dining facility, where she could meet additional personnel and experience military dining culture. The meal provided opportunities for more extensive conversations about military life, family relationships, and the challenges of maintaining connections across military and civilian communities. During dinner, Rebecca learned about the base's mission, recent operations, and the various challenges that soldiers faced during their deployment. The conversations provided insights into military life that went beyond her brother's letters and occasional phone calls, helping her understand the complexity and demands of his service. Sergeant Torres mentioned recent security incidents in the area, including attacks on supply convoys and attempts to infiltrate the base perimeter. "We've had some interesting times lately," he explained. "Nothing we can't handle, but it keeps everyone alert and focused on security procedures." Rebecca listened to these discussions with professional interest, noting similarities between security concerns in military environments and safety challenges she faced as a civilian first responder. Her experience with emergency situations in urban environments provided perspective on risk assessment and emergency response that resonated with the soldiers' experiences. The evening concluded with informal socializing in the recreation tent, where soldiers played games, watched movies, and maintained connections with family and friends through internet communications. Rebecca appreciated the opportunity to see how military personnel maintain morale and personal relationships despite the challenges of deployment. As she prepared to return to the guest quarters for the night, Rebecca reflected on the professionalism and dedication of the soldiers she had met. Their commitment to mission accomplishment and mutual support reminded her of the firefighters and emergency medical personnel she worked within civilian life, reinforcing her appreciation for public service regardless of the specific uniform or organization. The following morning brought routine activities as the base began another day of operations and logistics support for coalition forces throughout the region. Rebecca joined Diego for breakfast and planned to spend the day observing base operations and meeting additional personnel who represented different aspects of military service. At approximately 1030 hours, Rebecca was visiting the supply section with her brother when their conversation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of an explosion followed immediately by shouting and the activation of the base alarm system. The initial blast was followed by secondary explosions and the unmistakable crackling sound of fire, creating an immediate emergency situation that triggered trained responses from military personnel throughout the compound. Diego immediately switched into emergency response mode, grabbing his radio and beginning coordination procedures with other communications personnel. "Becca, you need to get to the bunker area. This sounds like a serious incident. His professional training took precedence over family concerns as he prepared to fulfill his duties during the emergency. However, Rebecca's own emergency response training was also activated by the sounds and visual indicators of a major incident. Through the tent opening, she could see thick black smoke rising from the direction of the main supply area, accompanied by the orange glow of flames and the continued sound of secondary explosions that suggested a significant fire involving combustible materials. Rather than moving toward the bunker area as Diego had instructed, Rebecca found herself moving toward the emergency, driven by the same instincts that had made her an effective emergency medical technician in civilian life. Her training and experience automatically focused her attention on the potential for casualties and the need for immediate emergency response. The scene that confronted Rebecca as she moved toward the supply area was chaotic but familiar from her civilian emergency response experience. A large storage tent containing ammunition, fuel, and other combustible supplies had caught fire, creating a dangerous situation with multiple explosion risks and potential for casualties among personnel who had been working in the area when the incident began. Military personnel were implementing emergency response procedures according to established protocols, with some soldiers creating security perimeters while others attempted firefighting operations and casualty evacuation. However, the intensity of the fire and the continued explosion risks were creating challenges that strained the base's emergency response capabilities. Rebecca observed the situation with the trained eye of an emergency responder, automatically assessing fire behavior, explosion risks, casualty locations, and emergency response coordination. Her civilian experience with structure fires, hazardous materials incidents, and mass casualty events provided perspective on the emergency that complemented the military personnel's combat-focused training. Master Sergeant James Wilson, the base fire chief, was coordinating emergency response operations from a command post positioned at a safe distance from the burning supply tent. Wilson had 22 years of military experience, including multiple deployments and extensive training in emergency response procedures. But the current incident presented challenges that tested every aspect of his expertise. "We've got multiple personnel unaccounted for in the supply area," Wilson reported over his radio to the base operations center. "Primary concern is Specialist Jackson, who was conducting inventory in Tent 7 when the fire started. We haven't been able to establish contact, and the fire intensity is preventing immediate access to his last known location." Rebecca overheard Wilson's report and immediately understood the situation's gravity. A soldier was potentially trapped in or near the burning supply area, but the fire's intensity and explosion risks were preventing rescue operations using standard military procedures. The situation required immediate action, but conventional emergency response protocols were inadequate for the specific circumstances. Without conscious decision-making, Rebecca found herself moving closer to the burning area, her emergency medical training automatically assessing access routes, casualty extraction procedures, and immediate life support requirements. Her civilian experience with structure fires had taught her to identify opportunities for rapid casualty extraction that might not be apparent to personnel whose training focused primarily on combat operations. The supply tent that was burning contained a complex mixture of materials that created multiple hazards beyond the obvious fire and explosion risks. Ammunition stored in the tent created ongoing explosion hazards, while fuel containers generated toxic smoke and accelerated fire spread. Chemical supplies used for equipment maintenance added additional toxicity risks that complicated both firefighting operations and casualty extraction procedures. Specialist Robert Jackson, the missing soldier, had been conducting routine inventory operations when an electrical malfunction had ignited combustible materials near his work area. The rapid fire spread had trapped him in a section of the tent where storage containers blocked normal exit routes, creating a situation where he was conscious but unable to evacuate without assistance. Military emergency response procedures emphasized establishing security perimeters and coordinating systematic firefighting operations, approaches that were appropriate for most situations but required time that Jackson might not have available. The fire's intensity was increasing, and the continued explosion risks made it increasingly dangerous for rescue personnel to approach his location. Rebecca assessed the situation and identified a potential access route that might allow rapid casualty extraction without exposing rescue personnel to the most dangerous areas of the fire. Her civilian experience with structure fires had taught her to identify structural elements and fire behavior patterns that could provide temporary protection during emergency operations, rather than waiting for military emergency response procedures to develop solutions. Rebecca made the spontaneous decision to attempt immediate casualty rescue using techniques she had learned during her civilian emergency medical training. Her approach involved using available materials to create temporary protection while moving quickly to the casualty location and extracting the trapped soldier before fire conditions became unsurvivable. Rebecca grabbed a poncho from a nearby supply pile and soaked it with water from a container used for equipment washing, creating improvised protection for her face and respiratory system. Her civilian training had taught her that rapid action with improvised protective equipment was often more effective than waiting for optimal protective gear to become available. Moving quickly but deliberately, Rebecca approached the burning tent from the side, where wind conditions carried smoke away from her intended access point. Her emergency response training guided her selection of an approach route that avoided the most dangerous areas while providing the fastest access to Jackson's probable location based on his assigned work area. Master Sergeant Wilson observed Rebecca's movements and immediately recognized that she was attempting an unauthorized and extremely dangerous rescue operation. "Ma'am, you need to clear the area immediately. This is a military emergency response operation, and civilian personnel are not authorized in the hazard zone." However, Rebecca's emergency medical training had taught her that certain situations required immediate action regardless of authorization or protocol concerns. Her assessment of Jackson's situation suggested that conventional emergency response procedures would not be implemented quickly enough to prevent serious injury or death, making unauthorized action the most ethical choice despite regulatory violations. Rebecca entered the burning tent through a section where the fire had not yet spread, using her improvised respiratory protection and moving quickly toward the area where Jackson was trapped. The heat and smoke conditions were severe, but her experience with structure fires had prepared her for the disorientation and physical stress of operating in such environments. Inside the tent, Rebecca found Jackson conscious but trapped beneath storage containers that had fallen when the initial explosion had occurred. He was suffering from smoke inhalation and burns to his hands and arms, but he was alert and able to communicate about his condition and the obstacles preventing his evacuation. "I'm Rebecca, Diego Martinez's sister. I'm an EMT, and I'm going to get you out of here," she told Jackson, automatically falling into the calm, professional manner she used when treating casualties in civilian emergency situations. Her emergency medical training guided her rapid assessment of his injuries and the obstacles to evacuation. Jackson's entrapment involved heavy storage containers that had fallen in a configuration that blocked normal movement but might allow extraction if approached from a specific angle. Rebecca's civilian experience with technical rescue operations provided knowledge of improvised extraction techniques that could be implemented quickly using available materials. Working rapidly but carefully, Rebecca used available tools to create leverage that allowed movement of the storage containers blocking Jackson's evacuation route. Her approach combined emergency medical knowledge with practical problem-solving skills developed through years of emergency response operations in challenging civilian environments. The extraction process required approximately 8 minutes of intensive physical effort under extremely dangerous conditions. The fire continued to spread throughout the tent, and ongoing explosions created additional hazards that threatened both Rebecca and Jackson as they worked to clear the evacuation route. During the extraction, Rebecca maintained constant communication with Jackson, using emergency medical procedures to monitor his condition and provide reassurance during the physically and psychologically stressful rescue operation. Her training guided her assessment of his injuries and her priorities for immediate medical care once they cleared the hazard area. When Rebecca finally succeeded in freeing Jackson from the storage containers, both individuals were suffering from significant smoke inhalation and heat exposure. Rebecca's burns were concentrated on her arms and hands, where she had direct contact with hot materials during the extraction process, while Jackson's injuries included burns, smoke inhalation, and trauma from the fallen containers. The evacuation from the burning tent required additional teamwork as both Rebecca and Jackson were weakened by smoke inhalation and heat exposure. Rebecca's emergency medical training guided her decision-making about evacuation priorities and immediate medical care requirements for both casualties. Master Sergeant Wilson and other emergency response personnel were prepared to assist as Rebecca and Jackson emerged from the burning tent, but their unauthorized rescue operation had been completed independently of military emergency response procedures. Wilson's reaction combined professional relief at the successful rescue with concern about unauthorized civilian involvement in military emergency operations. "Ma'am, that was an extremely dangerous and unauthorized action," Wilson told Rebecca as medical personnel began treating both casualties. "I appreciate what you did for Specialist Jackson, but civilian personnel cannot be permitted to participate in military emergency response operations without proper authorization and safety equipment." Rebecca's response reflected her civilian emergency medical training and her understanding of ethical obligations in emergency situations. "Sergeant Wilson, I understand your concerns about authorization and safety procedures. However, my assessment was that Specialist Jackson required immediate extraction that couldn't wait for full military emergency response implementation. I used techniques from my civilian emergency medical training that were appropriate for the specific circumstances." The immediate aftermath of the rescue operation involved medical treatment for both Rebecca and Jackson, coordination with military emergency response authorities, and assessment of the incident's implications for base security and safety procedures. Rebecca's unauthorized but successful rescue had created a complex situation that required careful handling by military leadership. Captain Walsh, as the base operations officer, was responsible for managing the incident's administrative and disciplinary aspects while ensuring that both casualties received appropriate medical care. Her initial assessment focused on Rebecca's safety and medical condition, but she also needed to address the violation of safety protocols and unauthorized civilian involvement in military operations. The base medical facility provided immediate treatment for both Rebecca and Jackson, with medical personnel focusing on smoke inhalation treatment, burn care, and assessment of potential complications from heat exposure. Rebecca's injuries were significant but not life-threatening, while Jackson's condition was stable thanks to the rapid extraction that had prevented more severe smoke inhalation and burn injuries. Dr. Maria Santos, the base medical officer, treated both casualties and provided assessment of their medical condition for military authorities. Ms. Martinez's actions probably saved Specialist Jackson's life, Dr. Santos reported to Captain Walsh. Her burns are significant and will require ongoing treatment. But Jackson's smoke inhalation would have been much worse without immediate extraction from the burning tent. The medical assessment confirmed that Rebecca's unauthorized rescue operation had been successful in preventing serious injury or death to Jackson, but her own injuries required medical treatment that would extend her stay at the base beyond the originally planned family visit duration. The situation created both medical and administrative complications that required coordination with multiple military and civilian authorities. As news of the rescue spread throughout the base, Rebecca found herself receiving visitors from soldiers who wanted to express their appreciation for her actions and their concern about her injuries. The visits provided insights into military culture and values that complemented her observations during the planned family visit. Sergeant Torres visited Rebecca in the medical facility and expressed the sentiments of many base personnel. "Ma'am, what you did for Jackson was incredible. You didn't have to risk your life for someone you didn't even know, especially since you're not military and weren't trained for our specific emergency procedures." Rebecca's response reflected her emergency medical background and her family's commitment to public service. Sergeant Torres, emergency response is about helping people when they're in danger, regardless of whether you're on duty or what uniform you're wearing. Jackson needed immediate help, and I had training that allowed me to provide it. That's what any emergency responder would do in a similar situation. The conversations with visiting soldiers provided Rebecca with deeper understanding of military values and culture, while also allowing her to share perspectives from civilian emergency response that complemented military training and procedures. These exchanges highlighted similarities between military and civilian approaches to emergency response and public service. Colonel Michael Harrison, the base commander, visited Rebecca to personally assess her condition and express appreciation for her actions. Harrison had 30 years of military experience, including multiple combat deployments and extensive leadership responsibilities, but Rebecca's civilian rescue operation presented unique considerations for military leadership and policy. Ms. Martinez, I want to personally thank you for your actions in rescuing Specialist Jackson, Colonel Harrison told Rebecca during his visit. However, I also need to address the safety and procedural concerns raised by your unauthorized involvement in military emergency operations. Your actions were heroic, but they also created risks and procedural violations that we need to discuss. Rebecca understood Harrison's position and the complexity of her situation. Colonel, I appreciate your concerns about military procedures and safety protocols. I didn't intend to violate any regulations or create additional problems for your base operations. My emergency medical training guided my assessment that immediate action was necessary to prevent serious injury or death, and I acted on that assessment using civilian emergency response procedures. The discussion between Rebecca and Colonel Harrison highlighted the intersection between civilian and military emergency response approaches, institutional authority and individual initiative, and the challenges of managing complex situations that didn't fit neatly into established procedural frameworks. Harrison's assessment of the situation required balancing appreciation for Rebecca's successful rescue operation with concerns about unauthorized civilian involvement in military operations. His decision-making process involved consultation with legal advisors, safety specialists, and higher military authorities to ensure appropriate handling of the unprecedented situation. The investigation into the supply tent fire revealed that the incident had resulted from electrical system malfunction that ignited combustible materials stored in the tent. The fire's rapid spread had been accelerated by the presence of fuel containers and ammunition, creating the dangerous conditions that had trapped Jackson and required immediate rescue operations. Master Sergeant Wilson's after-action report noted that military emergency response procedures had been implemented according to established protocols, but the fire's intensity and explosion risks had prevented rapid casualty extraction using conventional techniques. Rebecca's successful rescue had demonstrated alternative approaches that might be valuable for future emergency response training and procedure development. The incident analysis also examined whether modifications to military emergency response procedures might prevent similar situations or provide better capabilities for rapid casualty extraction in comparable circumstances. Rebecca's civilian emergency medical techniques had proven effective in conditions where military procedures were challenged by specific environmental factors. As Rebecca's medical treatment progressed, she began participating in discussions about emergency response procedures and training that might benefit from integration of civilian and military approaches. Her experience as a civilian emergency medical technician provided perspectives that complemented military training while highlighting potential improvements to emergency response capabilities. Captain Walsh coordinated these discussions as part of the broader base improvement process, recognizing that Rebecca's successful rescue operation provided learning opportunities that could enhance future emergency response effectiveness. The conversations involved emergency response personnel, medical staff, and training specialists who were interested in civilian emergency medical techniques. The integration discussions revealed significant similarities between civilian and military emergency response approaches, while also identifying specific techniques and procedures that could enhance military emergency capabilities. Rebecca's civilian training provided systematic approaches to rapid casualty assessment, improvised equipment utilization, and extraction techniques that complemented existing military procedures. Specialist Kim, the base medic who had initially discussed emergency medical procedures with Rebecca, participated in several training sessions where civilian techniques were demonstrated and practiced. The civilian emergency medical approaches provide valuable alternatives to our standard military procedures, Kim observed. Some of these techniques could be really useful in situations where our normal equipment or procedures aren't adequate. The training discussions led to requests for Rebecca to conduct formal presentations about civilian emergency medical techniques and their potential application to military emergency response operations. Her presentations combined technical instruction with practical demonstrations that showed how civilian approaches could complement military training. The formal training sessions drew participants from across the base, including emergency response personnel, medical staff, security personnel, and leaders who were interested in improving overall emergency response capabilities. Rebecca's presentations emphasized similarities between civilian and military emergency response, while highlighting specific techniques that could enhance military effectiveness. During one training session, Rebecca demonstrated improvised respiratory protection techniques that had enabled her successful entry into the burning supply tent. Her explanation of civilian approaches to structural fire assessment and rapid casualty extraction provided military personnel with additional tools for emergency response operations. Civilian emergency medical training emphasizes rapid assessment and immediate action using available resources, Rebecca explained during her presentation. Military procedures are more systematic and coordinated, but there are situations where rapid individual action can provide critical advantages, especially for casualty extraction in immediately dangerous environments. The training sessions also included practical exercises where military personnel practiced civilian emergency medical techniques under controlled conditions. These exercises allowed participants to evaluate the effectiveness of different approaches and consider how civilian techniques might be integrated into military training and procedures. The positive response to Rebecca's training contributions led to requests from other military installations for similar presentations and training sessions. Her experience had demonstrated the value of cross-training between civilian and military emergency response approaches, creating opportunities for broader collaboration and capability enhancement. As Rebecca's medical treatment neared completion, she began preparing to return to civilian life with a new understanding of military service and a deeper appreciation for the similarities between civilian and military approaches to emergency response and public service. Her experience at the forward operating base had evolved from a family visit to a significant contribution to military emergency response capabilities. The official recognition of Rebecca's actions took the form of a civilian commendation from the base commander, acknowledging her successful rescue of Specialist Jackson and her contributions to emergency response training and capability development. The commendation ceremony drew attendance from base personnel who had been involved in the incident and subsequent training activities. Colonel Harrison's commendation speech emphasized the importance of courage, initiative, and dedication to helping others regardless of official duties or organizational affiliations. Ms. Martinez demonstrated that heroism comes from character and training, not from military rank or official authorization. Her actions saved a soldier's life and provided valuable learning opportunities that will benefit our emergency response capabilities. Rebecca's response to the commendation reflected her emergency medical background and her family's commitment to public service. Colonel Harrison, emergency response is about helping people when they need it, whether you're on duty or off duty, military or civilian. Specialist Jackson needed help, and I had training that allowed me to provide it. That's what emergency responders do. The ceremony concluded with presentations from Specialist Jackson and other personnel who had been involved in the incident and subsequent training activities. Jackson's remarks emphasized how Rebecca's actions had saved his life and demonstrated the importance of individual initiative and courage in emergency situations. Ms. Martinez risked her life to save mine. Even though she didn't know me and wasn't required to help, Jackson told the assembled personnel. Her actions showed me what courage really means and reminded me why we serve, to help people when they need it most. The broader impact of Rebecca's actions extended beyond the immediate base to influence discussions about civilian-military cooperation in emergency response, cross-training opportunities, and recognition of civilian contributions to military mission success. Her experience became a case study for examining how civilian expertise could enhance military capabilities and how individual initiative could provide critical advantages in emergency situations. The documentation of Rebecca's rescue operation and subsequent training contributions was forwarded to higher military authorities for consideration in policy development and training program enhancement. Her civilian emergency medical techniques were evaluated for potential integration into military training curricula and emergency response procedures. Academic researchers and military training specialists began studying Rebecca's case as an example of effective civilian-military cooperation and cross-training that could inform broader approaches to emergency response capability development. Her experience provided insights into how civilian expertise could complement military training while highlighting the importance of individual initiative and courage in crisis situations. The research attention created opportunities for Rebecca to participate in conferences and training programs focused on emergency response, civilian-military cooperation, and leadership development. Her presentations emphasized the importance of systematic training, individual initiative, and dedication to helping others regardless of organizational boundaries or official duties. As Rebecca returned to her civilian career as an emergency medical technician, she carried with her enhanced understanding of military service and deeper appreciation for the similarities between civilian and military approaches to emergency response and public service. Her experience had demonstrated that effective emergency response transcended organizational boundaries and official roles. The long-term impact of Rebecca's actions continued to influence military emergency response training and procedures, with her civilian techniques being incorporated into curricula at multiple installations. Her experience had proven that civilian expertise could provide valuable enhancements to military capabilities while reinforcing the importance of courage, initiative, and dedication to helping others. The relationship between Rebecca and the soldiers she had met during her extended stay at the base continued through correspondence and occasional visits, creating lasting connections that bridged civilian and military communities. These relationships provided ongoing opportunities for sharing experiences and maintaining awareness of developments in emergency response and public service. Diego Martinez's perspective on his sister's actions reflected the pride and admiration of military personnel who had witnessed her courage and professionalism. Becca has always been someone who helps people when they need it, he told his colleagues. What she did for Jackson was incredible, but it was also typical of who she is and how our family raised us to think about service and helping others. The family background that had influenced both Rebecca and Diego's commitment to public service became part of the broader narrative about their actions during the base emergency. Their father's career as a firefighter and their mother's work as a trauma nurse had instilled values and training that proved critical during the emergency situation. The civilian recognition Rebecca received from emergency medical service organizations and firefighter associations reflected appreciation for her actions and their demonstration of civilian emergency response capabilities. Her experience became an example of how civilian training and military service could complement each other in addressing complex emergency situations. Years later, Rebecca's rescue of Specialist Jackson continued to influence discussions about emergency response, civilian-military cooperation, and the importance of individual initiative in crisis situations. Her actions had demonstrated that effective emergency response required courage, training, and dedication to helping others, regardless of official duties or organizational affiliations. The training programs that incorporated Rebecca's civilian emergency medical techniques continued to enhance military emergency response capabilities at multiple installations. Her contributions had provided lasting improvements to military training while highlighting the value of cross-training and civilian-military cooperation in emergency response capability development. The soldier who had been trapped in the burning supply tent continued his military career with enhanced appreciation for civilian emergency response capabilities and the importance of courage and initiative in crisis situations. Jackson's experience had reinforced his understanding of military values while highlighting the universal importance of helping others when they need assistance. Master Sergeant Wilson's emergency response procedures were enhanced by the lessons learned from Rebecca's successful rescue operation and subsequent training contributions. His reports and recommendations influenced emergency response training and procedures at multiple installations, providing lasting improvements to military emergency response capabilities. The base medical facility incorporated civilian emergency medical techniques into their training and procedures, enhancing their capabilities for treating casualties in challenging environments. Rebecca's contributions had provided practical improvements that enhanced medical care effectiveness, while reinforcing the importance of continuous learning and capability development. The story of Rebecca's unauthorized but successful rescue operation became part of military training curricula that emphasized the importance of individual initiative, courage, and dedication to helping others in emergency situations. Her experience provided a powerful example of how civilian expertise could complement military training while highlighting universal values of service and sacrifice. Colonel Harrison's leadership during the incident and its aftermath demonstrated effective management of complex situations that involved civilian-military cooperation, procedural violations, and unprecedented circumstances. His approach provided a model for military leaders facing similar challenges, while emphasizing the importance of recognizing and learning from civilian contributions to military mission success. The comprehensive documentation of the incident and its aftermath provided valuable insights for researchers, military trainers, and policy developers interested in emergency response, civilian-military cooperation, and leadership development. Rebecca's experience had contributed to broader understanding of how individual actions could influence institutional learning and capability development. The evolution of Rebecca's role from family visitor to rescue hero to training contributor demonstrated how unexpected circumstances could create opportunities for significant contributions that transcended original intentions or official roles. Her experience provided inspiration for others, while highlighting the importance of being prepared to help when circumstances require immediate action. The lasting relationships between Rebecca and the military personnel she had helped and trained provided ongoing connections that bridged civilian and military communities while maintaining shared commitment to emergency response and public service. These relationships continued to influence both civilian and military approaches to emergency response capability development. The civilian woman who had been left off the official survivor list had ultimately become one of the most significant contributors to the base's emergency response capabilities and training programs. Her actions had demonstrated that heroism and effective emergency response transcended official roles and organizational boundaries, requiring only courage, training, and dedication to helping others when they need assistance most.